The city had never been so quiet. On the morning of the Ides of March, Rome glittered like a festival. The sun rose slowly over the temples. Shops opened. Citizens walked through the streets. Soldiers stood at their posts. Everything looked normal. But sometimes the loudest days hide the quietest knives. Rome did not yet know it. Before the sun set that evening, the most powerful man in the city would be dead, and many of the men who would kill him were already awake. The most powerful man in Rome. Julius Caesar had spent many years in war. He fought in Gaul. He fought in civil war. He fought against enemies inside and outside Rome. Many soldiers followed him. They trusted him. They believed in him, and many victories came with his name. Rome celebrated him. Crowds filled the streets when he returned from war. They shouted his name, "Caesar! Caesar!" Flowers fell at his feet. Children ran beside his chariot. He was not a king. Rome did not allow kings. But sometimes power grows quietly and slowly until one man stands higher than the rest. Caesar became dictator. At first, it was temporary, 6 months, then longer again. Finally, the Senate gave him a new title, dictator for life. Some citizens were proud, some senators were not, because Rome had once removed a king, and many believed kings must never return, even if the man wore no crown. A growing fear. Inside the Senate, men began to whisper. At first, the whispers were small, quiet, careful. Many senators respected Caesar. He had forgiven old enemies. He had given land to soldiers. He had helped poor citizens. But power has a strange effect. The more power a man has, the more others imagine what he might do next. Cassius was one of those men. Gaius Cassius Longinus. He was intelligent, observant, and restless. One evening, he walked through the streets of Rome with another senator, Marcus Brutus. Brutus was younger, calm, thoughtful. He had fought against Caesar once, but Caesar had forgiven him. Now they stood on the same side, or at least that is what Rome believed. Cassius watched the crowd cheering for Caesar in the distance. Torches burned, voices shouted, music filled the night. Cassius spoke quietly. If Caesar becomes king, Rome will never be the same. Brutus did not answer immediately. He watched the crowd. Many people loved Caesar, but Brutus remembered something else, his own family history. Long ago, his ancestor helped remove the last king of Rome. That story lived in every Roman child. Brutus finally spoke, "I fear the future more than the man." Cassius looked at him carefully. A small seed had been planted, but seeds need time and water and quiet. A plan in the shadows. Days passed, weeks passed. Cassius continued to speak with other senators, not loudly, never in groups, always quietly, always privately, sometimes during walks, sometimes after meetings, sometimes in dark corners of temples. His message was always the same. Rome must remain free. Rome must never have a king. And Caesar was becoming too powerful. Some senators listened, some turned away, some said nothing. But fear is a powerful teacher, and slowly Cassius gathered allies. Casca, Trebonius, Cinna, Decimus. More names joined the quiet circle. But Cassius knew something important. Without Brutus, the plan would fail. Brutus was respected, honest. Citizens trusted him. If Brutus joined the conspiracy, people might believe the act was done for Rome, not for power. Cassius waited, and then, one night, he decided the moment had come. Letters in the dark. The city slept. Torches burned low in the streets. Wind moved through the narrow roads. Cassius sat at a table with several small pieces of paper. He wrote carefully, but the words looked different on each page. Some letters said, "Brutus, wake up. Rome needs you." Another said, "Are you truly Brutus if Caesar becomes king?" Another simply said, "Speak, strike, save Rome." Cassius sealed the letters. Then he gave them to trusted friends. He said, "Place them where Brutus will find them, near his house, near the Senate, anywhere he walks." Before sunrise, the letters were waiting, silent, patient. Brutus reads the letters. The next morning, Brutus walked through his garden. The air was cool. Birds sang quietly. Near the statue of his ancestor, he saw a piece of paper. He picked it up. He opened it. He read slowly, "Brutus, are you asleep?" Another letter waited near the gate. Another on a bench. Another near the path. Each letter spoke about Rome, about freedom, about Caesar. Brutus felt something heavy inside his chest. Cassius visited him later that day. They spoke quietly in the garden. Cassius said, "Rome respects you, Brutus. You must protect her." Brutus answered slowly, "I do not hate Caesar." Cassius nodded. "I know. That is why you must act." The conversation lasted a long time. When Cassius finally left, Brutus stood alone in the garden. The sky above Rome was dark. Torches burned in the streets. Brutus whispered to himself, "If Caesar becomes king, Rome may lose its freedom." The decision was not made in anger. It was made in silence. Strange warnings. As the days passed, strange signs appeared across Rome. Some citizens spoke of them. Others laughed. But a few people felt uneasy. One day, during a public festival, a strange man pushed through the crowd. He reached toward Caesar. Guards moved forward quickly, but the man only shouted one sentence, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar looked at him with curiosity. "What did you say?" he asked. The man repeated it, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar smiled slightly. Then he walked away. But not everyone forgot the words. A dream in the night. In Caesar's home, Calpurnia slept badly. The night felt heavy. Wind shook the windows. Thunder rolled across the sky. And then she dreamed. In her dream, she saw a statue of Caesar. Blood flowed from many small wounds. Roman citizens gathered around the statue. They dipped their hands in the blood. They smiled. Calpurnia woke suddenly. Her heart raced. She touched Caesar's arm. "You must not go to the Senate tomorrow," she said. Caesar opened his eyes slowly. "It was only a dream," he answered. But Calpurnia shook her head. "No, I feel danger." Outside, thunder rolled again. For a moment, Caesar said nothing. And somewhere in the city, several senators were preparing their knives. The morning of the Ides. Morning arrived, March 15th, the Ides of March. Rome woke early. Citizens walked through the streets. Merchants opened their stalls. But inside many houses, men dressed carefully. Cassius checked a small blade hidden beneath his clothing. Casca said very little. Brutus stood quietly near a window. The sky looked clear now, almost peaceful. But each man knew the plan. They would meet Caesar at the Senate. They would surround him, and then history would change forever. One last chance. At Caesar's house, Calpurnia still felt afraid. "Please," she said softly, "stay home today." Caesar considered her words. For a moment, he almost agreed. Almost. But Decimus arrived. Decimus was one of Caesar's trusted friends, and secretly, he was part of the conspiracy. Decimus spoke calmly. "The Senate waits for you. If you do not go, people will say you are afraid." Caesar frowned slightly. A leader must not appear weak. Slowly he stood. "Very well," he said. "I will go." Calpurnia watched him leave. Her dream still lived in her mind. And somewhere in the city, a man holding an important letter tried to reach Caesar. But the crowd was too large, and the letter remained unopened. The Senate fills. The Senate building stood tall near the center of Rome. Stone columns, wide steps, echoing halls. One by one, the senators arrived. They greeted each other politely. They smiled. They waited. But under their robes, many carried knives. Trebonius stood near the entrance. His job was simple. When Antony arrived, Trebonius would keep him outside. Antony was strong, loyal to Caesar. If he entered the Senate at the wrong moment, the plan could fail. Inside the chamber, Brutus stood silently. Cassius watched the door. Casca wiped sweat from his hands. No one spoke about the plan, but everyone felt it, like a storm waiting to break. Caesar arrives. Finally, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Caesar entered the Senate. The senators stood. Some bowed their heads. Others watched him carefully. Caesar walked toward his chair, confident, calm. But something felt strange in the room. Too quiet. Too many eyes watching. One senator stepped forward, Julius Caesar. The decision was not made in anger. It was made in silence. Strange warnings. As the days passed, strange signs appeared across Rome. Some citizens spoke of them. Others laughed. But a few people felt uneasy. One day, during a public festival, a strange man pushed through the crowd. He reached toward Caesar. Guards moved forward quickly, but the man only shouted one sentence, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar looked at him with curiosity. "What did you say?" he asked. The man repeated it, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar smiled slightly. Then he walked away. But not everyone forgot the words. A dream in the night. In Caesar's home, his wife Calpurnia slept badly. The night felt heavy. Wind shook the windows. Thunder rolled across the sky. And then she dreamed. In her dream, she saw a statue of Caesar. Blood flowed from many small wounds. Roman citizens gathered around the statue. They dipped their hands in the blood. They smiled. Calpurnia woke suddenly. Her heart raced. She touched Caesar's arm. "You must not go to the Senate tomorrow," she said. Caesar opened his eyes slowly. "It was only a dream," he answered. But Calpurnia shook her head. "No, I feel danger." Outside, thunder rolled again. For a moment, Caesar said nothing, and somewhere in the city, several senators were preparing their knives. The morning of the Ides. Morning arrived, March 15th.
The Ides of March. Rome woke early. Citizens walked through the streets. Merchants opened their stalls. But inside many houses, men dressed carefully. Cassius checked a small blade hidden beneath his clothing. Casca said very little. Brutus stood quietly near a window. The sky looked clear now, almost peaceful, but each man knew the plan. They would meet Caesar at the Senate. They would surround him, and then history would change forever. One last chance. At Caesar's house, Calpurnia still felt afraid. "Please," she said softly, "stay home today." Caesar considered her words. For a moment, he almost agreed. Almost. But Decimus arrived. Decimus was one of Caesar's trusted friends, and secretly, he was part of the conspiracy. Decimus spoke calmly. "The Senate waits for you. If you do not go, people will say you are afraid." Caesar frowned slightly. A leader must not appear weak. Slowly he stood. "Very well," he said. "I will go." Calpurnia watched him leave. Her dream still lived in her mind. And somewhere in the city, a man holding an important letter tried to reach Caesar. But the crowd was too large, and the letter remained unopened. The Senate fills. The Senate building stood tall near the center of Rome. Stone columns, wide steps, echoing halls. One by one, the senators arrived. They greeted each other politely. They smiled. They waited. But under their robes, many carried knives. Trebonius stood near the entrance. His job was simple. When Mark Antony arrived, Trebonius would keep him outside. Antony was strong, loyal to Caesar. If he entered the Senate at the wrong moment, the plan could fail. Inside the chamber, Brutus stood silently. Cassius watched the door. Casca wiped sweat from his hands. No one spoke about the plan, but everyone felt it, like a storm waiting to break. Caesar arrives. Finally, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Caesar entered the Senate. The senators stood. Some bowed their heads. Others watched him carefully. Caesar walked toward his chair, confident, calm. But something felt strange in the room. Too quiet. Too many eyes watching. One senator stepped forward. Julius Caesar. He carried a request, a petition. He asked Caesar to forgive his brother. Caesar waved his hand slightly. "Later," he said. But Caesar moved closer. He grabbed Caesar's robe. Suddenly the room changed. Casca stepped forward. His knife flashed. The first strike came quickly, but not perfectly. Caesar turned in surprise. "What is this?" he shouted. Then another senator moved, and another. Steel flashed, voices rose, chairs fell. Caesar tried to defend himself, but the circle closed around him. 23 knives, 23 wounds. And among the attackers, Caesar saw a familiar face. Brutus. For a moment,
everything slowed. Caesar looked into Brutus's eyes, and something inside him broke. He stopped fighting. He covered his face with his robe, and he fell. The room became silent. The most powerful man in Rome lay on the floor, dead. Silence after the storm. No one moved for several seconds. Blood spread across the stone floor. The conspirators looked at each other. Some breathed heavily. Some trembled. Cassius finally spoke. "Rome is free!" But outside the Senate, Rome did not yet know what had happened. The streets still buzzed with normal life. Children played, merchants shouted, and Mark Antony was still alive. A dangerous speech. When Antony finally learned the truth, his heart burned with anger. But he was careful, very careful. He met the conspirators calmly. "I only wish to honor Caesar at his funeral," Antony said. Brutus agreed. The conspirators believed the danger was over. They believed the people would thank them. They believed Rome would celebrate freedom. But crowds are powerful, and words can change everything. At Caesar's funeral, Antony stood before thousands of citizens. His voice was calm. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, listen to me." He spoke about Caesar, about his victories, about his kindness, about the wounds on his body. He lifted Caesar's robe. The crowd saw the holes, the blood, the betrayal. Anger rose like fire. Cries filled the air. "Revenge! Justice!" The crowd began to move through the streets. Rome was no longer calm. Rome was angry, and the conspirators suddenly realized something terrible. Caesar's death had not saved Rome. It had only begun a new war. Reflection. Caesar died on the floor of the Senate, but Rome did not become peaceful. Power did not disappear. It simply moved from one hand to another, from one man to another, from one army to another. History sometimes promises simple endings, but real history rarely gives them, because the fall of one powerful man often begins the rise of another. And Rome's greatest struggle was only beginning. The Senate chamber slowly emptied. The conspirators walked out together. Their robes were stained with blood, but they tried to stand proudly. Cassius lifted his arms. "People of Rome," he shouted, "today Rome is free." Some citizens stared in confusion. Others stepped backward. They had heard rumors, but rumors are not the same as truth. A man in the crowd asked quietly, "What happened inside the Senate?" Another voice answered, "Caesar is dead." For a moment, no one moved. Then fear spread through the streets like wind before a storm. Shops closed quickly. Doors shut. People hurried home, because Rome had seen civil war before, and everyone knew what usually came next. Antony learns the truth. Mark Antony was not inside the Senate when Caesar died. Trebonius had kept him outside. He spoke with him. He delayed him. He smiled and talked, all while the knives moved inside the chamber. When Antony finally heard the news, his face became still, very still. He did not shout. He did not run to the Senate. Instead, he thought carefully. The men who killed Caesar were still powerful. They had supporters. They had weapons. If Antony reacted too quickly, he might die next. So he sent a message to the conspirators. The message was simple. "I will not fight you," Antony said. "I only want peace for Rome." Cassius read the message. He looked at Brutus. "Do we trust him?" Cassius asked. Brutus answered slowly. "He was Caesar's friend, but he is also a Roman. We should not make more enemies today." Cassius thought for a moment. Then he nodded. "Let him come." A dangerous meeting. Antony entered the Senate later that day. The body of Caesar still lay nearby, covered now with cloth. The conspirators watched Antony carefully, hands near their robes, near their hidden knives. But Antony did not attack. He stood beside Caesar's body. He looked at the cloth. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke. "You were brave men," he said. "You did what you believed was right." Cassius studied him carefully. "Rome must be protected," Cassius replied. Antony nodded slowly. "Yes, Rome must be protected." Then Antony asked one question. "May I speak at Caesar's funeral?" The room became quiet. Cassius immediately frowned. "That is dangerous," he whispered to Brutus. "He could turn the crowd against us." But Brutus believed something different. Brutus believed people would understand their actions. He believed Rome would thank them. Finally, Brutus said, "Antony may speak, but he must not blame us." Antony bowed his head slightly. "I promise." But promises can change, especially when thousands of angry citizens are listening. Rome holds its breath. The days after Caesar's death felt strange. Rome did not celebrate. Rome did not feel free. Instead, the city waited. Citizens whispered in markets. Soldiers watched carefully. Many people asked the same quiet question. Was Caesar a tyrant or a protector? Brutus spoke to the public. He explained the assassination. He spoke calmly. "We loved Caesar, but we loved Rome more." Some citizens nodded. Others looked uncertain. Because Caesar had given land to many poor people. He had forgiven old enemies. He had brought victories to Rome. The crowd listened politely, but their hearts were not yet decided. Then the day of Caesar's funeral arrived. The funeral of Julius Caesar. The crowd was enormous. Thousands of Romans gathered in the forum. Men, women, soldiers, workers, old veterans from Caesar's army. The air felt heavy. At the center stood a wooden platform. Caesar's body rested there, covered by a cloth. Brutus spoke first. His voice was steady. "My fellow Romans," he said, "I killed Caesar because I feared for our freedom. If Caesar had lived, Rome might have lost its republic." Some people clapped quietly. Others stayed silent. Brutus finished his speech. Then he stepped back. Now it was Antony's turn. Antony begins to speak. Antony walked slowly to the platform. He looked at the crowd. Thousands of faces stared back at him. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he began, softly. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, listen to me." His voice was calm, gentle, not angry. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him." Some conspirators watched from the crowd. Cassius crossed his arms. "He sounds harmless," someone whispered. But Antony continued. "But Brutus says Caesar was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man." The crowd nodded. Yes, Brutus was honorable. Antony repeated the phrase again. "And Brutus is an honorable man." But slowly, something changed. Antony told stories. How Caesar refused a crown, how Caesar cried for poor citizens, how Caesar filled Rome's treasury with wealth. Was this ambition? Antony asked quietly. The crowd murmured. Antony continued. "Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man." Now the words sounded different, almost like a question.
The crowd began to change. Antony paused. He looked down at Caesar's body. Then he lifted the cloth. The crowd gasped. Blood stained the robe. Cuts and tears marked the fabric. "These are the wounds of Caesar," Antony said. "Each wound was made by a friend." He pointed to one hole in the cloth. "This was made by Cassius." Another tear. "This by Casca." Then Antony stopped. His voice grew quieter and heavier. "And this was made by Brutus." The crowd fell silent. Because everyone knew something, Caesar trusted Brutus. Antony continued softly. "Caesar loved him. And when Caesar saw Brutus strike, his heart broke." The crowd no longer looked calm. Anger began to grow, like fire moving through dry grass. The final spark. Antony raised his hand. "There is something else," he said. "A document. Caesar's will." The crowd leaned closer. Antony shook his head slowly. "No, I should not read it. It might make you angry." Voices shouted immediately, "Read it! Tell us!" Antony waited. Then he spoke again. "In his will, Caesar gives money to every citizen of Rome." The crowd erupted. "What? Money for us?" "Yes," Antony said, "and not only money. He gives his gardens to the people, the beautiful gardens by the river, places where your children can play." Now the crowd was no longer calm. They were furious. "Caesar loved us. Those men murdered him." The forum exploded with noise. Citizens lifted Caesar's body. Torches burned. People shouted for revenge. The conspirators watched in horror. Cassius whispered, "This was a mistake." Brutus said nothing, because he finally understood. The people did not see heroes. They saw murderers. Rome explodes. That night, Rome burned with anger. Crowds marched through the streets. They carried torches. They searched for the conspirators. Some senators fled immediately. Cassius left the city. Brutus left soon after. Other conspirators disappeared into the darkness. Rome had changed in only a few hours. Caesar was gone, but his shadow still ruled the city. And now another name began to rise. A young man, quiet, unknown to many Romans, but very important to Caesar.
His name was Octavian. The Heir Appears. Octavian was only 18 years old. He was Caesar's adopted son. In Caesar's will, Octavian became his official heir. When Octavian heard about Caesar's death, he was far from Rome. Many people expected him to stay away. After all, Rome was dangerous now. But Octavian made a different choice. He traveled toward Rome, slowly, carefully. When he arrived, he met Mark Antony. Two men, both connected to Caesar, both powerful in different ways, but neither fully trusted the other. Antony had Caesar's soldiers. Octavian had Caesar's name. And in Rome, names could be stronger than swords. A new struggle begins. At first, Antony believed he could control the young heir. Octavian looked calm, respectful, quiet. But appearances can be dangerous. Octavian slowly gathered support. Veterans from Caesar's army joined him. Citizens remembered Caesar's will. Soon, Rome had two leaders claiming Caesar's legacy, Antony and Octavian. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius gathered armies in the east. They believed they still fought for the Republic. They believed Rome would thank them one day. But history was moving quickly, and Rome was headed toward another war. The battle that decided everything. 2 years after Caesar's death, the armies finally met, near the city of Philippi. Brutus and Cassius commanded their forces. Across the field stood Antony and Octavian. Thousands of soldiers waited, armor shining in the sun, flags moving in the wind. The battle was fierce, long, confusing. At one point, Cassius believed the battle was lost. In despair, he took his own life. Brutus continued the fight, but eventually his army collapsed. Brutus stood quietly on a hill. The world he tried to protect was gone. The republic he believed in was fading. He spoke softly to a friend. "I loved Caesar, but I loved Rome more." Then Brutus chose death rather than capture. With that moment, the conspiracy ended, but Rome's story did not end. The long shadow of Caesar. After Philippi, Antony and Octavian ruled Rome together, but only for a short time, because power rarely shares space peacefully. Soon, they became enemies. Another war followed, and finally, Octavian defeated Antony. Years later, Octavian took a new title, Augustus. Rome no longer called itself a republic. It became an empire, and the first emperor ruled in Caesar's shadow. Final reflection. Julius Caesar died on the Ides of March. Many believed his death would save Rome. They believed removing one man would restore balance. But history is rarely that simple. Because Caesar's death did not stop ambition. It did not end power struggles. Instead, it opened the door to something new, the Roman Empire. Sometimes a knife ends a life, but it also begins a future no one expected. And in Rome, the echoes of the Ides of March were heard for centuries.
Rome did not sleep easily after Caesar's funeral. The fires from the night before were still burning in some streets. Broken carts lay on the roads.
Shops remained closed. People spoke in quiet voices. Because the city felt different now. The old order was gone, and nobody knew what would replace it. The city without Caesar. In the Senate, the seats looked the same. The marble floor looked the same. The tall columns still stood proudly. But the room felt empty, not because of silence, but because of absence. For many years, one man had filled that space, Caesar. Some senators had feared him, some had hated him, but many had also depended on him. He made decisions quickly. He ended arguments. He pushed Rome forward. Now he was gone, and suddenly every decision felt heavier. The quiet rise of Octavian. In a modest house near the center of Rome, a young man read a document carefully. His name was Gaius Octavius, but many now called him something else, Caesar's son. In Caesar's will, the young man had been adopted, legally, officially. Now he carried the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, but most people simply said Octavian. He was only 18 years old. Many senators thought he would be easy to control, too young, too inexperienced, too quiet. But Octavian understood something important. Rome respected strength, but Rome also respected patience. He did not shout. He did not threaten. Instead, he listened, and slowly he began to build his position. The soldiers remember. Many of Caesar's old soldiers were still in Italy.
Veterans, men who had marched through rain and snow, men who had crossed rivers and mountains, men who had fought beside Caesar for years. These soldiers remembered something clearly. Caesar had rewarded loyalty, land, money, honor. When Octavian sent messages to these veterans, many answered. They did not see a young stranger. They saw Caesar's heir, a continuation of their old commander. And slowly, a small army began to gather around him. Antony watches carefully. Antony was not blind to these events. He watched the young man carefully. Antony had experience. He had fought in battles. He had commanded legions. He had stood beside Caesar during the most dangerous moments of war. At first, Antony believed Octavian would simply follow his lead. But soon he noticed something troubling. The young man was gaining supporters, quietly, without noise, without speeches. One evening, Antony spoke to a trusted officer. "That boy is patient," Antony said, "and patience can be dangerous." The officer asked, "Should we stop him now?" Antony looked toward the dark streets of Rome. "Not yet. Let us see what he becomes." But time was already changing the balance of power. Brutus and Cassius in the East. Far from Rome, Brutus and Cassius prepared for war. They had fled the city after Antony's speech. The crowd had become too angry,
Too unpredictable. Now they gathered armies in the eastern provinces. Many governors supported them. Some senators believed they had saved the republic, and soldiers continued to arrive. Cassius was confident. "Our cause is just," he said. "We removed a tyrant." Brutus listened quietly, but inside he carried doubt. Sometimes, late at night, he remembered Caesar's face, the moment in the Senate, the moment when Caesar saw him. That look stayed with him. And sometimes Brutus wondered one question. Had Rome truly been saved, or had something worse begun? A new alliance. Back in Rome, the political situation grew more dangerous. The Senate tried to balance power. They did not want Antony to become too strong, so they gave support to Octavian. But this decision created an unexpected result. Soon, three powerful men stood at the center of Rome: Mark Antony, Octavian, and another leader named Lepidus. These three men formed an alliance. They called it the Second Triumvirate, three rulers sharing power. But the alliance had a dark purpose. They would hunt down the enemies of Caesar and the enemies of the new government. Lists were created, names written carefully, men marked for death. One name shocked many Romans: Cicero. The Fate of Cicero. Cicero was one of Rome's greatest speakers, a philosopher, a defender of the Republic.
He had spoken strongly against Antony. His words were powerful. But words can also be dangerous. When the new rulers made their lists, Cicero's name appeared. Some protested, but politics had become brutal. Soldiers were sent to find him. Cicero did not run. When the soldiers arrived, he stepped forward calmly. History remembers his final words. He said quietly, "There is nothing proper about what you are doing, but try to kill me properly." The soldiers carried out their orders. And with Cicero's death, another voice of the old republic disappeared. Rome was moving to a new future, one built not by debate, but by power. The march toward war. Eventually, the time came to face Brutus and Cassius. The armies of the triumvirate marched east. Thousands of soldiers crossed mountains and plains. Ships moved across the sea. Armor shined under the sun. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius prepared their defenses. Their army was strong, experienced, and confident. But both sides understood something important. This battle would decide the future of Rome. If Brutus and Cassius won, the Republic might return. If Antony and Octavian won, a new system would rise. The battlefield was near a city called Philippi, and history waited there. The night before battle. The night before the first battle was quiet, too quiet. In Brutus's tent, a single lamp burned. Maps covered the table. Brutus studied them carefully. Outside, soldiers whispered around small fires. Cassius entered the tent. He had spoken strongly against Antony. His words were powerful. But words can also be dangerous. When the new rulers made their lists, Cicero's name appeared. Some protested, but politics had become brutal. Soldiers were sent to find him. Cicero did not run. When the soldiers arrived, he stepped forward calmly. History remembers his final words. He said quietly, "There is nothing proper about what you are doing, but try to kill me properly." The soldiers carried out their orders. And with Cicero's death, another voice of the old republic disappeared. Rome was moving to a new future, one built not by debate, but by power. The march toward war. Eventually, the time came to face Brutus and Cassius. The armies of the triumvirate marched east. Thousands of soldiers crossed mountains and plains. Ships moved across the sea. Armor shined under the sun. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius prepared their defenses. Their army was strong, experienced, and confident. But both sides understood something important. This battle would decide the future of Rome. If Brutus and Cassius won, the Republic might return. If Antony and Octavian won, a new system would rise. The battlefield was near a city called Philippi, and history waited there. The night before battle. The night before the first battle was quiet, too quiet. In Brutus's tent, a single lamp burned. Maps covered the table. Brutus studied them carefully. Outside, soldiers whispered around small fires. Cassius entered the tent. "You should rest," Cassius said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Brutus nodded. "Yes, but sleep feels far away tonight." Cassius placed a hand on his shoulder. "We did what we had to do." Brutus did not answer, because some questions do not disappear with time. They simply grow quieter. A strange visitor. Later that night, something unusual happened. Brutus sat alone in the tent. The lamp flickered. The wind moved softly outside. Then he sensed something, a presence. He looked up. A shadow stood near the entrance. Brutus spoke firmly. "Who is there?" The figure answered slowly. "I am your evil spirit, Brutus." Some say it was a ghost. Some say it was a dream. Some say it was simply a tired mind imagining things. But the figure said one more sentence. "We will meet again at Philippi." Then the shadow disappeared. Brutus remained still for a long time, because tomorrow they would meet at Philippi.
The battle began. Morning arrived. The battlefield filled with noise. Trumpets sounded. Soldiers lifted their shields. Dust rose into the sky. Two massive armies faced each other. Brutus commanded one side. Cassius commanded another. Across the field stood Antony and Octavian. The first clash came suddenly. Steel struck steel. Shouts echoed across the valley. The fighting was brutal, confusing. At one point, Brutus's forces pushed forward successfully. They broke part of Octavian's line. Victory seemed possible. But on the other side of the battlefield, something terrible happened. Cassius received wrong information. He believed his army had been defeated. Believing all was lost, Cassius made a tragic decision. He asked a servant to help him take his own life. Moments later, news arrived. His army had not been defeated, but the decision had already been made. Cassius was dead. Brutus faces the end. The loss of Cassius changed everything. Brutus tried to continue the fight, but his army grew weaker.
Morale dropped. Supplies ran low. Finally, during the second battle at Philippi, defeat became clear. Brutus gathered a few trusted friends. He spoke quietly. "Our cause is finished. I do not regret loving Rome, but I regret that Rome could not remain free." He looked toward the battlefield one last time. Then he followed the path of Cassius. Brutus chose death rather than capture. With that moment, the conspiracy that killed Caesar finally ended. After the war, Antony and Octavian stood victorious. The men who killed Caesar were gone. But victory did not bring peace, because power still had to be divided. At first, Antony and Octavian ruled together. Antony controlled the eastern provinces, Octavian ruled the west, but the balance was fragile. Two strong leaders rarely share power forever. Soon, tension returned, and Rome prepared for yet another struggle. The long echo of the Ides. Years passed, more battles followed. Finally, Octavian defeated Antony in a final conflict. Antony and his ally Cleopatra fell, and Octavian stood alone as Rome's ruler. But he did something clever. He did not call himself king. Romans hated kings. Instead, he used a different title, Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. And in many ways, the empire he ruled was built from the events of one day, the Ides of March. Final reflection. On that morning, the city looked peaceful. Citizens walked through the streets. The Senate prepared for a meeting. No one expected that history would turn so sharply. But inside one building, 23 knives changed the future of Rome. The men who used those knives believed they were saving the Republic. Instead, they helped create an empire. Because history is not always shaped by good intentions. Sometimes it is shaped by consequences no one can see. And long after those men were gone, Rome still remembered one date, the Ides of March.
Many years later, the people of Rome still spoke about that day. The day when the Senate floor turned red. The day when friends became assassins. The day when Julius Caesar died. But memory is strange. Some remembered Caesar as a hero. Some remembered him as a danger. And some remembered him simply as a man who changed Rome forever. The memory of Caesar. Stories about Caesar spread across the empire. Soldiers told them in distant camps. Travelers repeated them in markets. Teachers told them to children learning Roman history. They spoke about his victories, his ambition, his courage, and his mistakes. Because Caesar was not a simple man. He could be generous. He could also be ruthless. He could forgive enemies, but he could also destroy them. Many Romans admired him, many feared him, and some believed both feelings at the same time. The question that never disappeared. One question continued to echo through Roman history. Did Caesar want to become king? Some people believed he did. They remembered the moment during a public festival. A crown was offered to him. The crowd watched closely. Caesar refused it, once, twice, 3 times. Each time the crowd cheered. But some senators still felt uneasy. Was Caesar refusing the crown because he truly rejected it, or because Rome was not yet ready to accept a king? No one can answer that question with certainty, because history rarely gives perfect answers. The weight of power. After the fall of Brutus and Cassius, the Roman world changed slowly. Octavian ruled carefully. He understood something important. The Roman people hated the idea of kings, so he avoided that word. Instead, he called himself Princeps, the first citizen. It sounded modest, respectful.
But everyone understood the truth. The Republic was no longer the same. Power now lived in one man. And that system would last for centuries. Ironically, the men who killed Caesar to stop a king helped create an emperor. Antony's story. After the victory at Philippi, Antony ruled the eastern provinces. There he met Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. Their alliance became famous across the ancient world. Some admired their power, others whispered about ambition and romance. But the relationship created tension with Octavian. Eventually, the two former allies became enemies. Their conflict ended in a great naval battle near Actium. Octavian won. Antony and Cleopatra both died soon after. With their deaths, Octavian stood alone. Rome finally had one ruler. The city changes. Under Augustus, Rome transformed. New temples rose, new roads connected distant lands. Peace slowly spread across the empire. Historians later called this period the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But even during peace, people still remembered the past, especially one moment, one building, one day. The Senate chamber where Caesar fell. Visitors sometimes stood near the place where he died. They looked down on the stone floor, and they imagined the scene, the shouting, the confusion, the knives, and the silence that followed. The human story. When historians study the assassination of Caesar, they often speak about politics, about power, about the Republic and the Empire. But behind these large ideas were human beings, friends, allies, rivals. Each one carrying hopes and fears. Cassius feared the rise of tyranny. Brutus believed he was protecting Rome. Antony felt loyalty to a fallen leader. Octavian saw an opportunity to shape the future. And Caesar himself? Perhaps he believed he was saving Rome in his own way. History is rarely a battle between heroes and villains. More often, it is a collision between different visions of the future.
A letter never read. There is a small story historians often mention. On the morning of the Ides of March, a man tried to give Caesar a letter. The letter contained a warning. It listed the names of the conspirators. If Caesar had read the letter immediately, he might have learned the truth. But the streets were crowded. Many people pushed forward with petitions and requests. Caesar placed the letter among other documents. He planned to read it later, but later never came. Sometimes history changes not because of great plans, but because of small moments. A letter placed aside, a warning ignored, a decision made too late. Calpurnia's dream. In Caesar's house, Calpurnia's dream also became part of the story. She had seen blood flowing from Caesar's statue. She had begged him not to go to the Senate. For centuries, people repeated this story. Some believed it was a true warning. Others believed it was only a legend. But the dream reminds us of something simple. Even powerful leaders are surrounded by people who care for them, people who worry, people who sense danger before it appears. Sometimes those warnings are heard, sometimes they are not. The Echo of Betrayal.
Perhaps the most famous moment of the assassination was the final look between Caesar and Brutus. Ancient writers describe that moment in different ways. Some say Caesar spoke the words, "You too, Brutus?" Others say he said nothing at all. They say he simply saw the face of a friend among his attackers and understood everything. Whether the words were spoken or not, the meaning remains powerful. Betrayal from an enemy is painful, but betrayal from a friend is something deeper, something harder to forget. Lessons from the Ides of March. What can we learn from the Ides of March? Historians have debated this question for more than 2,000 years. Some say the lesson is about ambition. Others say it is about the dangers of political violence. Some believe it shows how fragile a republic can be. Perhaps the most important lesson is simpler. Power always creates fear. Fear creates suspicion, and suspicion can lead good people to terrible decisions. The conspirators believed they were saving Rome, but their actions opened the door to something entirely different. A quiet ending. Today, the place where Caesar died is quiet. Tourists visit, historians study, but the noise of that terrible day has faded into the past. No senators gather there now. No soldiers guard the doors. Only ruins remain. Stone columns, broken walls, and the memory of a moment when history turned. The Ides of March reminds us that history is not only shaped by kings or armies. Sometimes it is shaped by choices. Choices made in fear. Choices made in hope. Choices by people who believe they are doing the right thing. Final reflection. Julius Caesar died on the floor of the Senate, but the story did not end with his death. It continued through Antony, through Brutus, through Octavian, through the rise of the Roman Empire. History moved forward, as it always does. And somewhere in the long memory of Rome, one day still stands above the others. A quiet morning, a crowded Senate chamber, and a warning that few people understood. Beware the Ides of March.